Morning, another beautiful day in God's kingdom. Let's take a look again at Prophet Jonah as we continue on this great adventure of his that he's embarked on unwittingly. And so we find Jonah at the point where the sailors are trying to find out who it is that has caused them the problem. And so we go to Jonah chapter 1 and read from verse 7, and it says, Then the sailors said to each other, Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And so they asked him, Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? Where is your country? From what people are you? All the questions were coming, to Jonah because they knew he was the one that was causing the problem. And so Jonah answers them and says, Listen, I am a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And this terrified the sailors, and they asked him, What have you done? They knew that he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. And the sea was getting rougher and rougher. So they asked Jonah, Okay, so what is it that we need to do? What should we do to make the sea calm down for us? They said. And Jonah told them something that was shocking, unbelievable to them, And he said to them, He said, Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. And of course, the sailors couldn't believe that. How would they throw him into the sea? The very thing that was obviously going to cause his death. They knew that. I mean, they were in the middle of nowhere. The sea was, there was this big storm. Everything was going wrong. And now he's saying, throw me into the sea. That they couldn't believe. But was it so unbelievable? Let's take a look at something else that this reminds me of as we go into the book of First Chronicles, I believe. Um, First Chronicles chapter 21, and we find David, King David, no less, in a similar situation where he's caused a great deal of trouble for himself, really. And then God decides to bring judgment upon him. So let's go again and take a look at 1 Chronicles chapter 21 and see what God says to Gad, who is David's prophet. And this was the message that God gave to him. God said, Go and say to King David, this is what the Lord says. I will give you three choices. Choose one of these punishments and I will inflict it on you. And so Gad the prophet came to David and said, These are the choices the Lord has given you. You may choose 3 years of famine, 3 years of destruction by the sword of your enemies, or 3 days of severe plague as the angel of the Lord brings devastation throughout the land of Israel. Decide what answer I should give the Lord who sent me. And David said to the prophet, I'm in a desperate situation. But you know what? Let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is very great. Do not let me fall into human hands, you see. And so that brings us back to Jonah. See, Jonah said, Look, I would rather fall into the hands of God than stay on this boat with men trying to save me, because that was what they began to do. They tried to do everything they could, to save Jonah, to prevent the idea or the act of throwing Jonah into the sea. They didn't want to do that because they thought he was going to die. So they thought he'd be safer with them. But Jonah said, No, throw me into the sea. I'd rather fall into the hands of God, just like King David said. And so these two men must know what they're talking about. And that means that for us as individuals, when we're in the middle of a big mess, a mess that, yes, we may have caused ourselves, whatever that thing is, however desperate the situation is, however terrible it is, what this is teaching us is that we call on God. Yes, we may have caused the trouble ourselves. Yes, we may have walked into it ourselves. Yes, we may have orchestrated the whole thing ourselves. But you know what? I would rather fall into the hands of God than fall into the hands of men. I'd rather fall into the hands of God and allow God to deal with the situation than allow men to help me. I'd rather let God help me. And that's an important lesson for us to learn today, I believe. God bless you. Have a beautiful day.